Welcome to the latest transmission of Rice Against the Grain. Today, I am joined by fellow content creator and host of the YouTube channel Old World Florida, Dr. Narco Longo. We're going to learn more about him, his research, his YouTube channel, as we go against the grain of what they have taught us to be history. Before we get into it, make sure you visit ricetvx.com and sign up for my mailing list so you never miss an update or new Rice TVX and Rice Against the Grain content. You will also find links to all of my various channels as well as my social media. Make sure you're following both of my YouTube channels, Rice TVX as well as Rice Against the Grain. And due to censorship, make sure you follow me on other alternative platforms such as Rumble and Odyssey, where I do post up exclusive content. If you want to support Rice TVX, be sure to check out and join my Patreon channel, where you will get early access to my videos with no ads, unedited. You will also get exclusive content and more. I will include links in the video description for everything I just mentioned, as well as everything shared on today's video. Joining me on today's show is a first-time guest, somebody that I've been looking forward to talking to. It's a channel that I've been watching for a few months. As many of you might know, I like to dive into the worlds of alternative and hidden history. Today, I am joined by the host of Old World Florida, Mr. Dr. Narco Longo. Very interesting name, my friend. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
No, I appreciate you coming on, man. I guess, too, before we begin, you're not technically officially a doctor, are you?
No, sir.
Okay. And I will have links down below for your YouTube channel and for your Patreon as well. You just recently did an appearance on Tenfold Hat with San Tripoli. So congrats with that, man. I was actually in the middle of starting that episode right before we were meeting today for our interview. So
awesome.
I'm definitely looking forward to the conversation, man. If you don't mind, would you, for people who might be unfamiliar with you, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Dr. Longo. I run the Old World Florida channel, and I'm an alternative historian, I guess you could say. I dabble into linguistics, and I'm an astrologer. So probably foremostly, I'm an astrologer, and that's what I do here at this this bookstore. I run an occult metaphysical bookstore with my brother in Palm Beach, and so I can, I have a lot of reference material, to say the least. But
what got you into wanting to study history? Especially if you're like into astrology. I mean, astrology and history. I mean, I guess I could see a connection, but not. I don't see most astrologers diving into the world that you're into.
Well, most astrologers have a bone through their nose, and they go to Starbucks every day. It's a bunch of junk.
Yeah.
So, I wouldn't even say that I necessarily love history. I guess I have a knack for it. I did well in school, even with the fake history. But basically, Florida is kind of the starting place of America. And I saw this whole Tartaria movement happening, and I was a little late to the party. But like you said, we talked a little bit before we started. There's a lot of junk out there, and there's a lot of just idiots kind of just making stuff up and conflating what is this rich history of America with whatever they saw on Sci-Fi Channel that last night. And
right.
It's kind of muddying the waters, and I think we owe it to our states and the country if we enjoy it. I love living in Florida, to kind of set the record straight. And even the mainstream history is just laughable here in Florida for being the starting place of America, the United States, to have such little history, such little Hollywood attention, no TV shows, movies, big books. Despite the Seminole Wars in Florida, the second Seminole War alone of the three, the second one alone was the longest and most expensive conflict ever fought between America and a native power. So that was Jackson Jacksonville in Florida, named after him.
Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson sent military, U.S. Army, down into 50,000 strong, 50,000 armed men, down to go pursue less than 1,000 Seminoles, less than 1,000. So,
wow,
that's the narrative we're given, and all these forts and ruins, and we're told they're plantations out in basically the woods in Florida. They look like ancient temples and ancient archways and stone structures. Very, very, very eerie to see out in the Florida woods. And we're told that these are all like Civil War era plantations.
interesting.
That the Seminoles all destroyed during the Seminole Wars. So the Seminole Wars, ironically, going on at near the same time as, and the Seminoles look like Moors, by the way. Turbans, headdresses, fezzes, vests. It's, I'll show you. But at that same time, you have the Mormon Wars going on. Mormon Wars, right? The same people who think that America was the land of the Old Testament, essentially.
Yeah.
Then you have the Barbary Wars going on in the Barbary coast of Africa against who? The Moors, Berbers, fighting piracy. And this was
This is all during the Civil War time period, or during or
just before the Civil War.
Okay, so mid 1700s roughly.
No, early 1800s.
Or why am I saying 1700s? Yeah, I'm thinking mid 1800s.
Yeah, early mid 1800s.
I mean, that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons I was really digging your channel, man. It's like some of the things you cover. The idea, I mean, the history of Florida, the idea of the Fertile Crescent, the Garden of Eden, Atlantis, and then the idea of what America was prior to history, I guess, maybe prior to the flood. And that's something I do want to get into. We also, you touched on the more stuff that I want to talk about. You mentioned calendar, because like I was telling you before we started recording, it's kind of frustrating when you think about things from a perspective of really wanting to know the truth of where do we come from? How did what was the starting point? How many civilizations existed prior to us? Is the continent that I'm on actually the continent that maybe was written in some historical documents, or were they changed? And is the calendar even correct? It's like, how much we don't know, like what time frame where he could possibly be in. We don't know where everything is. It's kind of like almost a lost hope. It's almost like we just need to focus on the present and move forward. But if we don't know our history as a species, we're going to continue making the same mistakes and going down the same roads until we learn from those mistakes in history. So I definitely want to touch on the Fertile Crescent and Atlantis, but where do you want to start?
Well, you did ask the question before, and it ties into what you just said of how does astrology play into history? Well, I would argue that the only true starting place for a firm grasp, a firm understanding of history, is that which is immovable and fixed and can never change and has never changed and will never change. The stars. The stars have never moved. They will never move. They spin, they revolve. But in relation to each other, they have never moved and will never move. So those stars spin around us. And those same stars and those same configurations and constellations were viewed identically by people 7,000 years ago, 8,000, 100,000 years ago. And if you can seek out astrological threads in history, in mythologies, in ancient texts, you can peer farther back than, dare I say, anyone else, than a theologian, a scholar, because all they can subsist off of is this material he said, she said, this happened here, this happened there, and they just conflate everything onto each other, and they get it wrong every time. Because as soon as something enters into symbolic territory or transcendental, it just goes right over their head. For example, all the sacrifices and stuff going on in the Bible of animals. Originally, no animal was sacrificed on this earth. You had, every time you see an instance of a bull getting sacrificed, this is indicative of a story pertaining to the constellation of Taurus, or a ram getting slaughtered, the constellation Aries, and so on and so on. Every time there's a betrayal or a backstabbing, you're seeing the sign Scorpio being represented or personified or mythologized. When you see a temptation, you're seeing Libra being personified, because these stories are written in the sky and we cannot escape them, even if we want to. Doesn't matter what language you're speaking. Astrology was never invented. So as much as I'd like to point to advanced civilizations back in time that do give us these common threads in mythology, no one can deny that curious people will always deduce the same information from the stars, no matter how remotely they are,
Right.
Oriented. But
it made me think too, like the pyramids, especially like in Giza, seem to be set up to certain constellations. So maybe knowing that, you could place where in history when that alignment took place, or when the planets were there, to kind of give an indication of when things took place. Seems like there's a lot of that when it comes to ancient civilizations, whether it's natives in different lands, in Mexico, over in Egypt, in Asian countries, all over South America. It's pretty crazy. And one of the things that I was dabbling into looking at was, that I've been researching, is the idea of the United States, America, not being what we've been told it was throughout history. And one of the things that you were bringing up is, in your videos, one of the very first things that I saw from you was the interviews that you did with, I think his name is John Saxer. Is it John? John
Saxer. He also goes by Johann Christian von Sachs, his Swiss name.
Okay. Yeah. That was fascinating with the those Saxer stones. They're basically kind of like anchor stones for ships.
Giant ancient stone anchors, the
like
largest
huge
stone anchors ever discovered in the world.
What are they, like 10, 12 foot tall?
The tallest one we saw was sticking 10 feet out of the ground and was at least 2 feet into the ground. It was cast down into cement basically in like a landscaping project.
And go ahead, sorry.
They're just all incorporated into landscaping around like the 1920s. They
to be decorative,
they'd find these rocks and put them in the medians and put them in front of houses and neighborhoods for some weird reason. So they're all standing up in front of houses, and the holes are anomalous in themselves. But some people will say limestone does some funky things, and every once in a while you might see a kind of Swiss cheese perfectly bored hole through limestone, and that can happen sometimes. However, the rope marks dispel all debate whether these were deployed as either anchors or mooring stones. I tend to agree with anchors, because most people's objection with the anchors is they're too big. Everyone looking at them will say, yes, those are ancient stone anchors, but they're too big, so it must be a mooring stone. Now, the one you were just looking at with the small hole going through it, that was probably a mooring stone. You could
one here?
Yep. That looks like a perfect rope loop where they could feed rope in.
Right.
It would be kind of at like the corner of a dock.
And this was on the Gulf side of Florida, in the Tampa
Bay area is the most natural, welcoming natural seaport in the world. You have the Gulf of Mexico, which in itself is a very, very calm, shallow bay. It's a large bay And on the Gulf side, you're protected from the Atlantic, the rough Atlantic. Well, within that bay, you have a bay within a bay, Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay, which is, nestled, very well protected. That hole you're looking at right there also just completely debunks any person that's going to say these holes are natural. That one is perfectly bored through, and the coating, the patina on the inside of that hole is as dark, if not darker, as the patina on the outside of that rock. Some of the stones, sorry. Yeah.
No, that's fine. I didn't mean to interrupt. Were they moved from the original locations? Were all the stones where they originally were?
Most of these, I wasn't here in the 1900s and I wasn't there in the 1920s when they were bumping into a lot of these and incorporating them into the parks and the design of the city and the street.
Yeah, because they don't look like they would be easy to move. So I didn't know if they were where they were originally at and they were just kind of settling around them.
Now this one's really interesting. It's sawed right in half. There's a bored hole, and they sawed it right in half.
Who sawed it?
Beats me, but it's sitting there at the park.
Yeah.
And these are just kind of sitting in the parking lot. And the trees in that area are just glorious. The Druids worshipped oak trees. Central Florida has some older oak trees than anywhere in Europe, believe it or not. Fairchild Oak is over 2,000 years old. But blah, blah, blah. Most of these anchors were hit by machinery when they were dredging much of this area. So when they are dredging these canals, Florida is traced with all these ancient canoe highways. That's what we're told there are, canoe highways.
Okay.
Well, I have all these articles from the 1900s, 1800s saying this is the Venice of ancient America. This is a metropolis, an aquatic metropolis in the Tampa Bay area. They were popping open mounds that had over 1,000 bodies, skeletons in them. Giants too, of course. So This was like your, I would love to talk about Eden because I don't want to bring the magnifying glass just over Florida. But I think it's worth noting that in the Old Testament, in paradise times, we had giant people, and people lived well over hundreds and hundreds of years. It's no coincidence, in my opinion, that when the Spanish, who were looking for the fountain of youth, were looking for the Garden of Eden, in Columbus's own words, looking for the Garden of Eden, and on his second and third voyage in the Caribbean, he claimed to have found it. He said, "We found it. This is paradise. This is," and he was not being poetic when he was saying that.
I don't know that I was told in history that Columbus was set to look for the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm. It's in the Sam Tripoli video that I just posted.
Okay.
I have a clipping of an article. Columbus was obsessed with the Garden of Eden. Now that's, that could work both ways. Is he creating the myth himself to sell the idea of this westward expansion? And that's kind of how all that stuff got swept under the rug initially, is they're just saying he's being poetic, dramatic, but when you start looking at all this stuff, I have another article, for example, that shows Pedro de Santander in 1557 writing back to a French king, I believe. Oh, wait, no, that would have been Spanish. A Spanish king at that time saying, here are.
Trying to let them know you're recording.
We're closed. Go, for real, go away, we're closed. So,
is that a customer?
Yeah, but he's my friend, so it's
okay.
Basically, in Florida, you have Canaanites, Moabites, Amalekites, and what's the other one? Amorites, Amalekites, Moabites, and Canaanites.
In Florida.
And those people were known to be exceptionally tall. When you look at the religious practices, the mythology, this and that, it all lines up. And just like you said, the pyramids being arranged to stars, that's not unique to Egypt or Florida. That's something that was common in all pyramid building cultures. In Florida, you have endless mounds, thousands of mounds, but you're not allowed to call them pyramids, of course. But
Or do you think there's something underneath of those mounds, like they've been
I can
covered
show you
up?
some of them that are pyramid.
Yeah, anything you want to screen share, you're more than welcome to.
Okay.
Now, I've heard the idea that the United States is like Babylon and Israel and such were located in the in America. This is what I've heard. This like where the deserts are, where the Grand Canyon is. There's supposedly a lot of, I don't know if it's Egyptian artifacts, but there's been a lot of interesting artifacts that just didn't necessarily fit in with the history that we've been told. But I never had heard necessarily the idea that somewhere in Florida, because I'm assuming you're not saying Florida in general is the Garden of Eden. Is there a specific area of Florida that you're referring to as what would be the Garden of Eden?
So all of Peninsula Florida has the perfect temperature that you would absolutely require from a literal paradise. Subtropical climate that would allow you to dress naked, if not close to naked, year round. So in other areas, it might not get that cold, but in other areas, for example, Colorado, Missouri, all these northern states, all these, even Michigan, they will each hit 115 degrees this year. Florida, however, the highest temperature we have on record in Florida is 109 degrees ever. So right there, that heat kills dozens of people every month. Even in 2023, with the air conditioning, this and that, the only people who die from the weather in Florida are people who die in their cars from the heat, and that's terrible to say. But in the 1920s, there was not a single case of heat stroke ever recorded in Florida. I think that's very worth noting.
Well, I heard you say that it's only one recorded day that in Florida's history that it's been over 100 degrees.
Well, that was Miami. So Miami has only on record ever, and they've been recording since about the Civil War, has only ever gone over 100 degrees once.
Now, I will tell you, I grew up on the East Coast. I'm in North Carolina. I'm from Virginia. So I have humidity and all that kind of stuff. When I've gone to Miami in the summertime and high 90s feels like 110.
Sure.
I know that I've heard what you said about it's a state that's good for healthy people, because if you're obese, you got spore problems where your skin's not breathing properly, then what you're experiencing in Florida might be uncomfortable for you.
Also, just clothes in general, as
I see a lot of loose fitting clothes out there, like what you're wearing.
As little as you can wear clothes, the better. So if you're trying to wear pants and a long sleeve shirt every day, it's probably going to be pretty miserable. The humidity forbids it. You can't get away with that. Your clothes will stick to you and this and that. So I spend a lot of time at the beach. I edit most of my videos at a park, just out in the open air.
That's
I
cool.
live in a van, like I said. So I feel most of this heat, and I can tell you under good circumstances, it's bearable and it's not bad. The heat is never the issue. Now, in the dead of summer at night, it's pretty hard to sleep. So we do travel out to like North Carolina and stuff in the summer, where it gets very, very nice up in the mountains. And there's still spring water. It's mountain spring water. Almost.
What are you going to, like the Asheville, Boone area?
Asheville, yeah, I love Asheville.
Okay, I've got a friend out in Asheville. I'm not too far from Asheville. I think like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours max.
I grew up going to summer camp in West North Carolina, Hendersonville area.
Okay, cool. So you're saying that the Gulf side, the west side of Florida, would have been perfect for where the garden would be. Do you have like a specific location though?
So I think that's a bit
kind of much.
Yeah, it's like arbitrary. I think that's what I'm trying to say with the weather. If you're looking for the ideal climate, it's all of peninsular Florida. If you're looking for the infinite spring water and some more of the healing therapeutic benefits, then you're looking at either Central Florida, north of Lake Okeechobee, near Orlando, or up into the Panhandle near Georgia, Alabama. That's like the real gold mine with all the
Pensacola area.
springs. Yeah, there's springs out there too. Once you start getting, these springs are just so unique, one of a kind. In other areas, springs usually rise to the top of high ground. In Florida, you have some of the highest magnitude springs in the world, rocketing out of the ground right at sea level. In fact, there's some areas on the coast of Florida in the ocean where spring water comes up with such power that you can dip a glass into the ocean above where the spring comes up, and it's pushing with such magnitude that you can take a glass and drink from the ocean, and it will be 100% spring water, fresh water. And that's up near Northeast Florida, up near St. Augustine area. Around there's springs like that.
So with your research, I mean, if we think of like some of the history that we've been taught being correct, what's in the Bible being correct, the flood stories, that's kind of where this gets in a weird area. And this is like the thing that I like to kind of explore. So based off of your research, would you have said that prior to the flood, if the Noah story was correct, that Noah would have built his ark here somewhere in the United States, and then when the flood ended, he ended up wherever he ended up, which might have been over in the Babylonian Mesopotamia area?
So all across the southeast United States, you see many ark locations. You have Arkansas, right? You have Arkansas, Kansas, right? Also Kansas. You have Canada. So you have these are like Con and Canaan.
From linguistics, though, they go back to what you're saying. Okay.
Yes, and then in Arkansas, you have Arkadelphia. Arkansas has some of the most Mississippian coastline, and knowing that the Mississippi is the river Isis, containing the name of Isis within its own name, Isis Ippi, that is the true river Isis.
Now, aside from, I know I heard Sam mention it, Sam Tripoli, aside from the word ISIS being mentioned in it, is there more evidence, anything else that kind of points more towards this, or are we in denial, like you said?
Well, yes, there is some architecture.
Denial about denial.
There is some architecture that affirms this. Out in Nashville area, you have a Parthenon building that is a exact replica of the Greek Parthenon, which I think is a temple to Zeus, if I'm not mistaken. You have some of them are World Fair buildings, but they're made from solid stone. Up and down the Mississippi, close to the Mississippi, West Tennessee. In this area, you have a lot of Moorish architecture as well. The Fertile Crescent, where the Mississippi terminates in Louisiana, New Orleans, used to be called Crescent City. And if you go look at all the old sewer caps, they have Crescent City, New Orleans, etched into them from about over 100 years ago. So New Orleans was Crescent City. There's also a Venice along the Mississippi, Cairo, Memphis, of course, Cairo, Alexandria, up and down these different states. And we're told that was all just the result of radical Christian, pioneers who just named everything they saw after something they read in the Bible that they probably couldn't even pronounce. A lot of the stuff like Methuselah and all these words and stuff like that.
Right.
So they were just naming everything they could, I guess, and we're just going to have to accept that unless we want to be ridiculed.
But on the opposite spectrum from the way that you're thinking is it's potentially possible that these places existed here. And then when the boat, Noah's boat per se, I'm going to use that as the example, landed in, settled somewhere in Mesopotamia, Babylonian area. Then they
Turkey,
renamed,
Armenia.
then they renamed those areas what they were familiar with from where they were from.
Now, the first society over on the eastern continents, we're told is Sumeria, right? Like the first official civilization. And that started with Uruk, the first nation or the first city, Uruk, in Iraq, modern day Iraq, right? This would be after the flood, civilization's getting its restart.
Right, like the city of and all that same time period.
Thank you. Is Uruk.
Oh, they're the same.
And Iraq is
okay.
Uruk. So yeah, it's not. I'm not saying they're the same, but it's same culture, same story.
Well, Babylon was in what we know of is Iraq.
Now, Iraq comes from. It's funny we use the word First Nation to describe people like the Iroquois, right? Iroquois, I would point to as the true Iraqis, and some of the Cherokee and Creek natives. As you know, is it any coincidence that the Greek came and set up 2 colonies on either coast of Florida? And you know, the way I'm going to be posting a Greek equals Creek video coming up about all the Greek history in Florida. I just did the Fertile Crescent about like a lot of the Islamic and Moorish stuff. So the Moorish stuff isn't just like the focus of my channel, but it's just part of what I've been into the last like month or two.
No, I would think the focus would be the Garden of Eden and Atlantis stuff, because that would be kind of old world Florida to me.
But it all ties in because Atlantis, why am I talking about Greek people? Atlantis is a Greek myth. The Garden of Eden is even a Greek myth. It was hijacked from a Greek myth, the Garden of Hesperides. But
yeah, no, it was because it was who is the famous philosopher that we say, was it Socrates? Not Socrates.
Plato talked about Atlantis.
Plato from his great uncle or something, Solon or something. Yeah, that would have been ancient Greek. Yeah, that's interesting to think.
So, well, you asked about the Ark. I want to make this clear. Noah's Ark was constructed. If there was a true physical Noah's Ark, you know, there's many interpretations. You could say this is all transcendental, and hey, I'm right there with you. But if there is a literal Ark, it was constructed in the northwest coast of Florida, the Gulf Coast, near what's today Tallahassee or Bristol, Florida, along what is also today known as the Apalachicola River. So the Apalachicola River near Tallahassee. And Tallahassee could also be pronounced Ta-Allah-Hassi, right? Just like Dallas could be Dallas. And you have a lot of these Allah words, but also you have Apple words like the Appalachian Mountains, the Apalachicola River, the Apache, the Appalachie. So this is the apple of Eden. The story's been a little spread around, and different names have been attributed to different symbols, but the Apalachicola River is the apple of Eden. And
people assume the apple thing, and then we see fruit. We're not really quite sure what the fruit was, but there is a lot of myth to the apple. Where does the apple? Is it because of Florida?
So
and is it really an apple, or is it the oranges?
It was never an apple. See, good distinction. Thank you. So the golden apples of mythology and the fruit of Eden would have been an orange, a golden orange, which has always been called a golden apple, even in Greek, Hebrew, Russian, Finnish, and these are the big ones, by the way, Greek, Hebrew, and Finnish. I mean, those are your fathers of all.
Oranges have been called golden apples in the past.
Oh, yes. In just about every language except English, orange means golden apple.
I didn't watch this video, but did you actually live on orange juice for 6 months?
So that's clickbait. That is a true story. I am reading an account of a woman who did live over 6 months on orange juice.
Well, good job with the clickbait, though.
Well, I mean, that's actually just a small section of the video right to the left of it.
This one right here?
Yeah. So I just wanted to clip out the story for people that were interested in the story alone. But yeah, shameless clickbait,
Okay.
And
No, I love that though.
so I've done 24 hours on orange juice. I do that all the time. That's no problem. It's easy. I think orange juice is the most healing thing on the planet. And this is like a nectar of the gods. It's liquid sunshine as it used to be advertised in America. In Florida, in Crescent City, Florida, they were advertising this juice, orange juice, as more juice, MOR dash juice. That's very interesting, isn't it? In Crescent City, Florida. So Crescent City citrus brand. Well, blah, blah, blah. Apple comes from Apollo. They're not going to tell you that officially, but Apple is Apollo. So it's
Which is another sun god.
Exactly. Solar deity. So apples, the apples that we eat today are kind of it's a misnomer to call those Apollo's fruit, or a golden sun-like fruit. They're not solar in any means. Their qualities are not solar. So if you know your astrology or your hermetic mysticism, whatever, alchemy, oranges are ruled by the sun. Oranges and citrus is ruled by the sun. It is a solar natured fruit. Apples, however, are ruled by Venus. So apple should come from Aphrodite. Aphrodite is where we should get apple from. And L and R do switch in many languages, right? Can you give me a Japanese accent real quick?
Fried
lice, or maybe that's Chinese. I don't know.
Yeah.
But basically, L's and R's switch in many languages. Even German, the R's get swallowed, and it can sound like an L, or all these things. And basically, Aphrodite is Venus. Another word for Venus. Aphrodite, Eve,
the morning star.
Lucifer. Yes, exactly. You're right on point. Lucifer. How does this all tie into astrology? Libra is the sign that represents the fall of man, because that is the sign when the sun falls, and fall begins. Autumn, right? Autumn, which is when the sun, the savior, goes into his tomb. Autumn. And this is from autumn, from autumn, the fall of man. Who rules Libra? So, Aries is the beginning. Adam is Aries, or Atlas. Aries, Atlas, Adam, same guy. Mars is Adam, right? And because we're man, and the word man comes from Mars. So the first man, the first Mars is Adam, the first sign of the zodiac. And the second sign of the zodiac is Taurus, the bull, who's ruled by Venus. So this is your Adam and Eve. This is an astrological symbol, mythology. Okay. You have your Adam and Eve, and then you have the events of Genesis. Well, once you get to Libra in this story, you have the fall of man. And that's because it's the beginning of fall. Like I said, the sun is betrayed, the sun falls, and Venus rules Libra. But who else? So Venus is Lucifer. Well, who are the two bad guys in the Bible? It's Satan and Lucifer, and they're clearly not the same person, but we're not really given much of a explanation on that.
Right.
It's Lucifer.
Well, even if you want to even include the serpent in that, because the serpent could be
the serpent is Libra.
Okay, because I would consider that as a negative or bad entity in comparison. So, and I've always questioned what is the difference between Satan, Lucifer, and the serpent.
Yes, it all is right there in the astrology to be explained. So the Libra's two animals are the dove and the serpent, or the serpent and the dove. Like Aleister Crowley says, who I believe was a Libra himself, there is love and there is love. There's the serpent and the dove. So there's two types of love, and Libra rules love largely. Libra rules a lot of L words: lying, law, lawyers, liberty, Libros, like a book, a library, Libra, all these things. Also, do you know where the word scales? When you scale something and you see the LB, That comes from Libra.
Scale something, you see the LB. Are you talking about like scaling
weight.
a fish,
Yeah,
weighing
scaling
it?
something. When you weigh something, why is pound LB?
That's from
because
Libra.
yes, it is, because Libra is the scales. Got to know your
Yeah,
astrology.
I didn't know that. That's crazy how a lot of things are based off astrology like that.
Everything is. The days of the week are the days of the week. We worship astrology. We don't even know it. We all unconsciously live out astrological festivals and rites. We worship gods. We don't even know it.
Well, it's
Halloween.
almost like it's like the basis of like a lot of what you were explaining is kind of the basis of astrotheology.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, astro is the basis of all theology. So astrotheology is kind of redundant.
Okay.
The stars are the starting point, the starting point of everything. You can't start anything without the stars. It's right there in the word. So we go wrong every time we start something without consulting the stars. People think it's divination, it's black magic. No, it's harmony. Do you wear a leather jacket in 100-degree heat? You would never.
No,
So
I'm not, but I've seen some people do it. It's trying to look cool, but yeah, I get what you're
right.
saying. You want to be as even with nature as you possibly can be. So yeah,
exactly.
you don't wear shorts in the South Pole.
Everyone tries to foresee the movements of the sun. Everyone tries to see foresee the movements of the moon. Even the mainstream church, the Catholic Church, dates its holidays with the movements of the full moon. So how are they going to look at astrologers and say that they're demonic or evil or divinatory black magic? It's none of that. Astrology is a pure science. All sciences stem from astrology. All arts, sciences, all methods of understanding nature and human existence stem from astrology, whether you like it or not.
That's pretty fascinating, man. To go on to Atlantis, was Atlantis pre-flood?
So there's a lot of interpretations.
Because I mean, the only reason I'm mentioning this is because if you're looking at Florida and the Gulf of Mexico as being the Fertile Crescent, and we had a flood and we ended up on the other side of the world, how do we get back here for Atlantis? So it would seem to me like that would be prior to the flood.
So Atlantis means all the land is ice. Paradise means before the ice. Para-da-is. Para means before, right? Paradise means before the ice. Atlantis means all the land is ice. So, kind of what our mainstream history would call the Jurassic period. They'll say it's like, 50 million years ago, bajillion, gazillion years ago. They don't even know, right? But they'll even admit the whole world was tropical. You don't have to shill that. I appreciate that. But
I don't mind just showing it so people want to support what you're doing, man. I mean, it helps with changing up what people see on the screen. So it's not just me and you just the entire time.
Right.
And it also lets people know where they can find additional information, man. And if people want to support you, then more power to them and more power to you, Mr. Dr. Narco Longo.
Yeah. So Atlantis has many interpretations. In this current age, to us, it does indicate a location, a point of transatlantic contact between Europe, Eurasia, Africa, and the Americas, which under the current, I like to kind of nickname it the Darwinian Columbian regime, where everything between Columbus, Darwin, and all stuff of the sort refutes any contact between the Atlantic before Columbus, right? They'll say, oh, the Vikings traced an ice wall or traced some ice cubes across the North Atlantic. It's all BS. The oldest burials here in Florida, in peninsular Florida, in Titusville area, are the Windover Bog people. These are burials identical to some in prehistoric Europe, and these bodies were tested in Florida. They had European DNA. So there's your transatlantic contact. It's right there. They swept it under the rug until another site was found offshore. And this offshore site had the same qualities, same burial type as the one inland in the Windover Bog site. Now, this was called the Manasota Key offshore site. And that same burial, but was offshore. So that's a big thorn in their side, too, because now this puts all of this Eurasian DNA in Florida back past 7,000 years old. And they cannot hide or run away from that timeline because you have the site inland corroborating the site offshore. And that tells you it must have been before 7,000 years of sea level rise, which we know is for sure.
That's pretty crazy, man. I mean, it's like as I'm thinking about this, it's like I don't even really know how to concisely lay this stuff out because I'm thinking about so much information. It's like you mentioned, like we were talking a little bit before recording about, I had mentioned that from what I was starting to understand from my research, a lot of the early Hebrew seems to translate to a lot of the languages that Native Americans, that we call Native Americans, speak.
Mm-hmm.
But if we had, if this was the original land and we had a flood and we ended up over in Sumeria, Babylon area, and everyone on Earth was killed per se, besides the ones on the boat, like where do we get the survivors to remember the history to be here if this area was flooded out?
Okay. At one time on this planet, there was one group of people, one family, so to speak. You know, in every corner of every continent, there was one family, meaning you could go from Helsinki, Finland to Mogadishu, Somalia, and see the same people with the same skin tone and same facial features, and you would be recognized as family, and everyone on the planet was treated like family. And these times are not so familiar anymore, right? But if we dig a little deep, we know this to be true. Where we all got kind of sent awry, where everything kind of got split up, is that this Tower of Babel myth was the creation of the human race. And the creation of the human race is only between 200,000 years ago and 12,000 years ago. Now, I think the races got separated about 200,000 years ago. And then 10, 15,000 years ago, before the end of this recent ice age, you had the first, essentially, iteration of the human race. Now, what does human race mean? We were man before. We were man.
Color of man.
Human race. Perfect. There you go. Human race. Hue means color. Man is what we were before. Whole man. We were a whole family, whole man, man and woman. And then you have race. And race, phonetically, is also rays, like rays of light, different rays, different spectrum. So yeah, you have hue, man, rays, different color variation of humanity today. And that's kind of the game that we're under today, is we each have different skill sets and, you know, culture and cuisines and stuff like that. And the common thread is what must be sought out if we're to live in harmony. So that's why they deny the Atlantis story. That's why they deny the Atlantis myth outright and call it pseudoscience and all this stuff, because it throws out of Africa theory right out the window. It crumbles the ancient Egypt narrative that you had chimpanzees turning into the ancient Egyptians, turning into modern society. And that's kind of what they're trying to convince us of.
What about the Rorschach? I'm sorry, I know I'm probably not saying it right, but the Rorschach structure in Africa, it's like
that's the concentric circles,
the eye of the Sahara, they call it.
Yeah. So I mean, that doesn't really mean anything to me.
There's a lot of speculation that that's where Atlantis was because of the description of the circular structures of Atlantis.
It may have been a utopian city at some point, but someone's gonna have to convince me that was in the ocean or under the ocean at some point or something like that. It's two, that whole area does not meet any of the requirements of Eden or Atlantis. And
Right.
Personally, I think everyone's gone wrong by splitting the two up and not acknowledging that they are the same myth. The Hesperides. Paradise comes from the word Hesperides. Now, I just told you it means the ice too, but it all ties in with the introduction of winter and hell and how humanity was punished, so to speak, not by a malevolent god, but the conditions of the earth were changed. We were seasoned. God had to season us. We're being seasoned for something. So the seasons were introduced, and the seasons before in paradise times, the whole earth was subtropical. And like I mentioned, the Jurassic period before, they'll even tell you this in mainstream. Oh, the whole world was tropical, and giant dragonflies and giant mangoes and bananas, and they tell you it. They just push it back to 50 million years ago,
Right.
and they push the whole dinosaur narrative on top of it.
So Atlantis and Garden of Eden are basically the same story, just told different ways from different cultures, in a sense.
Yes, they both represent a fall of man.
But one talks about speculating that they were a technologically advanced progression of humanity or man versus the start of civilization, which would have been a lot more simple. Where do you get where does that disconnect come from? Because I mean, I can see where they would have a similarity, but they kind of distinctly seem to be different.
So Prometheus and Lucifer are the same. So Lucifer is like the you have Lucifer, who's the temptation, right? Eve was tempted by the serpent. That's Lucifer, Libra. Well, then you also have Saturn, who's Satan. So Satan's the devil, the evil, right? Just like God is good, the devil's the evil. That's Saturn, Satan, the bad guy. Santa Claus, right? Santa in winter, which is hell, because you speak a little Spanish or Italian or French or Latin?
A little tiny bit.
Can you tell me hell in any of those languages or winter?
I know cold is frio.
Okay, well, invierno is how you say winter. How do you say hell in all those languages? Infierno. So these are the same word. Infierno, invierno. So hell is frozen over. And that's kind of
which is crazy when you associate fire with hell.
Yes, because that came about at a time when they were burning people alive. And in order to instill fear in them, they had to tell you hell is bad and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt, so tell us what you know, confess. So they'll say, hell is fiery. We're going to burn you at the stake. And you're going to cross over into hell. Originally, hell is a beautiful, sacred word. Want to know the two most sacred words to pagan Europeans before the church came about and started skinning people alive?
What were they?
Hell, which was the capital of the pagan empire, Helsinki, Finland, was the capital city of the entire planet in prehistoric times, in pagan times, pre-deluge, pre-flood, pre-ice age. Helsinki, Finland. The church.
I was gonna say, it's interesting you said that, though, because I've heard someone like Max Egan talk about an original language prior to Babel that was very, very akin to I forget the word he uses, but Hungarian.
Yeah,
but Hungarian is similar to Finnish, and both languages have a larger alphabet and more a lot more words to describe things, because I think they might have 50 different words for snow in Hungarian, because there's 50 different types of snow.
Well, so Finnish, I'm all for giving Hungarian its dues, no doubt. They definitely have a big piece of the puzzle. And the Ora Linda also has a big piece of this puzzle. But Finland is the tippy top. And J.R.R. Tolkien knew this, or else he would not have been able to produce such extensive mythology like he did, such accurate mythology. He wasn't creating fantasy. He was lining out a new method of understanding what was lost. And he used the Finnish language as the wellspring. He used Finnish language to finesse his language, to finesse his creations, to give them
Okay.
finesse. To finish something, to add finish comes from Finland, to have fine craftsmanship, right?
To complete something, to finish something is finish.
Yes, finesse.
And from an etymological linguistic point of view,
From an astro etymological, yeah, they're not going to tell you that officially, but it's Venetian. So Venetian is Venus. To make things look pretty, to do things nice, is Venus, ruled by the planet Venus. Venus, all words that come from the planet Venus, you get Venetian, a vendor, a venue, right? Revenue. These are all revenue words or commerce words. Now, commerce has to do with Mercury, and that's mercantile, merchant, and all
that
this
comes
stuff.
back to the Phoenicians, right?
Well, the Phoenicians is where we get everything about the stars. The Greeks barely knew anything about the stars, believe it or not.
It seems like we got a lot from Phoenicians.
Yes.
Alphabet, because even the Phoenician alphabet and Hebrew alphabet are very similar. And we're talking about the Native Americans speaking something or having a writing similar to Hebrew, which again, it's like it's very bizarre when you like start to like try to connect the dots and you think about what you've been taught.
So Elven, when J.R.R. Tolkien constructed Elven, he used the Finnish language. Now, El is actually the word, the Phoenician word for God. El was the supreme deity of the Phoenicians. So El, Finn, is telling you this is the Phoenicians. These are the elves that seeded civilized humanity, that seeded agriculture, written language, domesticated animal, all these things, astrology, the sciences.
So calling like something elves is like calling them like a godlike species?
Well, originally the elves who came out of the North Pole, the Elvins, the Finns, this is like Finnegan's Wake. Finnegan's Wake is like another way of saying in the wake of the Phoenicians. Finnegan comes from Galway, which was an Irish port.
I was gonna say I've always associated that with Ireland.
Yeah, so Finnegan is the Irish name for Phoenician. Just like in Italy, they call it Venetian. So we know Phoenician and Venetian mean the same thing, but they're spelled differently by different languages to obscure the fact that they're the same, because everything Phoenician got written out of history. So also the reason why Finnish and Hungarian don't relate to any other languages is because they are at the top of the pyramid of languages.
Okay.
So when you're down here speaking like English or something, and
our mutt language that was designed to keep us stupid.
Hey, no, English is perfect. It's a divine, angelic language, and we'll get to that in a little bit.
Okay.
But as far as it being related to so many languages, that's undeniable. It draws from many, many languages. So as far as mutt, you're correct, but it's still a valid angelic language. But as for the Finnish, do you know what the word finial means? A finial is the peak of like a steeple. A finial is like
a pinnacle?
Like a pinnacle. Yes, pinnacle and finial are the same word. A pinnacle,
okay.
Pin and fin are the same root. Yes.
Now, is it spelled with an F or a PH, or does it matter?
It's all the same. PH, okay. F, V, it's the same. You use your mouth phonetically. You don't use your eyes to speak, So right. That's how they obscure this stuff, is they'll say, oh, that's Venice with a V, and that's Finland with an F. Those have nothing to do with each other. And if you think so, you're an idiot. Whereas if you trust your ears and you actually start looking into it, that's the ultimate source of all these connections, threads. And that's the one that they label as the most arbitrary, is like it's like word soup, like just drawing random connections from any word I want to. And I'm sure I'm guilty of that to some extent. But once you understand, when J.R.R. Tolkien started studying Finnish, he was able to construct languages out of thin air, such fine languages out of thin air. He used Finnish and he used Welsh to construct his Elvish languages. So Finnish is the finesse and the finial, the tippy top of the pyramid. the father of all languages. And then Welsh is another form. So hieroglyphics actually translate into Welsh, Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is called Cimmerioglyphics. Check out Ross Broadstock.
So I found out my family is from Wales, and like I had somebody who's like a fourth cousin who wrote a book that goes back to my 5-time great grandfather. And one of the things I learned about the Welsh language was Old Welsh was apparently like really, really similar to Aramaic.
Yes, people say that Jesus was in Britain and all this stuff.
That's some of the stuff that Ralph Ellis, before we started recording, I was mentioning, he talks about too. Like even the idea of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table from an astrotheological point of view, even though you're saying those two words together are like oxymoron, but from that point of view, he gives some interesting perspective. Because there's astrology tied into the whole King Arthur story.
Could you search into that YouTube? Could you search Ross Broadstock, please?
On the search for the YouTube in general or your channel?
Yeah, no, just right there, please.
BROAB.
So Ross, that's him right there. Britain's Hidden History, that's him. Okay. So Ross actually passed away like 2 months ago in the middle of a live stream. It was crazy. He was live streaming like Britain's hidden history, like King Arthur and old megalithic sites out there. And
they've got an upcoming live stream coming up. Is somebody else running his channel now?
They're rebooting all of his old shows. I'm pretty sure it's his son that's running the channel now. It's really sad, guys. Go check it out.
I'll put a link of it in the video description.
Yeah, basically, I hope he wasn't taken out, but it seems like he just collapsed from like a heart issue or something in the middle of a stream. But basically, his research is amazing. The guy that he has partnered with or kind of studied under, Blackett or whatever the other guys' names are, you might see in there. But basically, he goes into studying all these megalithic sites and mounds and walls out in Britain and Wales and that area. And of course, diving into these Arthur myths and Jesus and much of ancient Old Testament events actually transpiring in the British Isles, and much of this old maritime empire actually being an Irish empire that was overthrown by Rome, and they surrendered. And this is why Rome never set foot in Ireland, because Ireland was given under basically a surrendering, was given that small island.
What we know of is
where
Ireland
they are today. What we know of Ireland.
Wow.
And they've just been guarded by Saxons ever since. They've been guarded and subdued by a Saxon mercenary nation imposed by Rome. And this is why Ireland swallowed Roman Catholicism so hard. It wasn't willing. That was the only way they could spare in this ancient story. This is not mainstream history whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, I don't remember being taught that in school.
Yeah, no. So shout out Connor McDarry. Connor McDarry is a author who covers a lot of this stuff. He's like a couple generations ahead of us, but before us. But Ross Broadstock was doing great stuff on that as far as Jesus possibly living or originating in Wales and Aramaic, ancient Paleo Hebrew being Welsh. And this is why Welsh, J.R.R. Tolkien recognized this too. Most of Welsh is the wellspring of language. These
Welsh
languages
is the wellspring. So Aramaic came from Welsh, old Welsh.
Probably. Well, see now Welsh in Ross's, it's not my expertise. In Ross's research, he points to Egyptian hieroglyphs being best translated into Welsh, the Welsh language. So that's more of like the pictographic language.
Yeah.
Being translated into the Welsh, and that would be the Welsh application. Whereas the phonetic was more of the port language, the sailors' language that they could sail into an interface between any local population. They could, just as English is used today. That's why I always say English is the oldest language on the planet. It's just the most evolved form of Phoenician, serving the same original purpose of Phoenician. That's cross-continental contact.
Yeah, I mean, this one now. I obviously don't want to dive into this on this one, as I mentioned to you before, I want to be able to do more episodes. I want to explore the whole maritime aspect because I think that's really fascinating, especially with today's world. I didn't mean to interrupt with that. The Welsh thing is fucking incredible, man. That's without getting too far ahead too, like with and not to go too deep with going backwards, but with the ark thing, is there a because I think it said that in the Bible that it was made of gopher wood. Is there a large what's the word I'm looking for, area where there's a condensed gopher wood in that vicinity north of Florida or in Florida?
Yes, there is, Chris, in just west of Tallahassee. Tallahassee is the capital of Florida.
Okay.
So that's why I bring it up. Just west of there is a city called Bristol. And right along the Florida-Georgia border, there's a lake called Lake Seminole. Right. So Seminole, ironically, means first, like a seminal undertaking is your first big project, right? A seminal work is your first. Seminal means to be starting, originating, right? Well, then seminal also means, what we're officially told it means, is runaway. So to run away. But seminal also means Semitic, as I pointed out.
Yeah, it has
ol or ola is just a Native American suffix, but the prefix is identical. Semitic or Shemitic. You know, Mexico used to be marked on maps as the land of Shem. Shem. And Mex is Shem backwards. Mex. Shem. Mesoamerican is Semo-American.
Yeah, but how would Shem go from the area of Mesopotamia to Mexico?
It wasn't. It was transferred there. And why do we call Mesopotamia Mesopotamia? You know, Potama in Greek means like river, right? Well, in Native American, it means the same thing in many different native languages. Like we have the Potomac River that Washington crossed, right?
Yeah.
You have a Potomac down here, Patamac. So the Creek language is the Greek language, and that points to a common Atlantean influence, common Atlantean. But okay, so you asked about the ark.
The Crete. I know we're going crazy, but the Crete language, does it relate back to the Greek alphabet and language?
Oh, absolutely. I don't want to get
that's
too
another
deep
subject.
In that.
Yeah, I just was just curious.
It's going to be in my upcoming Greek video where I'm focusing on the Greek connections in Florida, the Greek history, ancient.
Because I've heard you say the Greek Crete thing, and obviously I've mentioned that natives have a similar alphabet and language to older Hebrew, which would make sense with Semitic and Seminole.
And the Creeks were wearing togas at this time. They're wearing togas, actual
like what we think of as Greek togas.
Precisely, they were wearing spot on
in the continental America.
Yes, sir. I have pictures
as
of
what we would call Native Americans.
Yes, sir. Yep.
These Crete Indians were.
Yes,
and I don't like using the word Indian. I hate that word, but
well, that's okay. They all have indigo dyed clothing. Now, is it any coincidence that the Greek, about 1,500 Greeks that colonized the northeast coast of Florida, officially, in the 1700s, before any American was in Florida, there was a Greek colony, Greco-Turk Ottoman colony of Turks and Greeks brought over by the British and Scots to northeast Florida, and it was an indigo plantation, indigo farm. It was a mega farm. It was 100,000 acre farm. Even by today's standards, that's a mega farm, a super farm.
And there's a relationship between the Ottoman Empire and the Moors.
Yes, they're both Islamic. They have the same insignia. The insignia of Morocco and Turkey are near identical. And if you go back in history, even more so, the Byzantine and Ottoman, when you think of that, for people who don't know their history, you can kind of think of Greek and Muslim mixed together a little bit. or Greek and
Byzantine.
Arabic
It's like
a
the
little
Greek
bit.
or the okay. Okay, that makes
Where
sense.
so in Florida you have that same admixture of Greek and Arabic culture getting mixed in together, and we're not given in my opinion, we're not given a suitable explanation. We're told that they were coming here just to be indentured servants, the Greeks that came here. So we do have, just for the record, we do have over 1,500 actual Greeks moving to Florida. Then today we have 60,000 descendants of those Greeks in the St. Augustine, Northeast Florida, Jacksonville, New Smyrna area, Menorcan and Greek descendants in Florida. So you have your Greeks. Then in the west coast of Florida, Tarpon Springs, you have the most Greek city in America, Tarpon Springs, founded in like 1890s. They're doing sponge fishing, and there's all these shrines over there. The Greek Orthodox Church makes a pilgrimage there every year, and they send basically like a high up preacher that goes and blesses everything, and they have this celebration where they throw a cross out into a spring that Ponce de Leon himself sailed into, or maybe it was Menendez named like the river of God, Holy Spirit River, Holy Spirit Spring. And they throw this cross, a Greek Orthodox priest throws a gold cross into the spring. And the young children of this Greek, very, very unique Greek community in America dive into the spring and fight for the cross and bring it up. And whoever gets it is blessed. And this tradition is like, where the hell does it come from? Why do they do it in this one spot? And it draws about 50,000 people.
Wow.
It's crazy, sometimes how many people fit in to just watch this. People sail in from Greece or fly over to watch it. And so if you know about my channel, why we're talking about Greek so much is because Atlantis is a Greek myth, of course, in the Tampa Bay area, which is what I'm describing with the celebration and the Greek people in Tarpon Springs. That's in the Tampa Bay area. Tampa Bay area is where we find all these ancient stone anchors. And in this area, you had Creek natives coming in before the Civil War, essentially. So with all these overlays, there's really just a big story brewing that is really guarded behind the nothing interesting happened before Columbus narrative that we're given. And I think that's just the starting point that I think everyone can get on board with is, number one, Columbus didn't discover anything. Even the liberals and the conservatives can agree on that.
But we still celebrate Columbus Day as if Columbus did something special.
Well, DC, everyone's like District of Columbia, corporate entity, this and that. Well, that's Christopher Columbus, Columbus descends from the same family, the Colonna family, right? Cologne, Italy, Cologne, Germany, Colonna, this, Cologne, that, colonizer. It all stems from that. Just like medicine, the medical industry, and the Medicis and this stuff.
I don't, again, I don't want to get too off track, but why do you think this information has been obscured or hidden or not put into the public record?
Out of Africa theory. It's really simple. They have to convince you that.
Well, for what reason? What's the reason behind it? Like, you thought about this for a minute.
Sure, not to get too heady, but to disempower people, to disenfranchise them, to convince everyone that they're a meat-eating monkey from outer space on a rock for no reason that happened by accident. And if you're lucky, you might live to 70 years, but it was all for nothing anyway because God's made up, and the only way to experience existence is through the senses and all this stuff. Aristotelian thought, a lot of things went wrong with Aristotle because he was a fuckboy that was kicked out of Plato's mystery school. And he kind of founded materialism, the school of materialism, the belief in the sensory world as the primary world. And we've kind of gone wrong since then. Descartes only kind of echoed and helped solidify this into like the Western mind, with materialism and material. For some people hear materialism and they think of like shopping and like handbags and stuff. I'm talking about, source materialism, fighting for resources and stuff like that. Because a lot of this does venture into like lefty liberal mentality. Because at the end of the day, if you want to talk about what's wrong with the world, you're almost going to have to point to when we stopped eating tropical fruit out in nature and just frolicking. And a lot of what's gone wrong with the planet is what we owe our arts and sciences to. So I'm speaking on the large scale here. After the flood, humanity was molded into a different race that valued different things, and the intellect was developed through the implementation of agriculture and grain-based agriculture. We used to, like I said, just kind of frolic and eat tropical fruit all day. No hunting, no gathering, just fruit from the tree.
Just naked, eat fruit, and just have a good old time.
Yeah. And when I say Florida is paradise,
and smoke some tree of life.
Yes. And when I say Florida is Eden, I think Florida is the only place on the planet where that is still found, where that still remains. And that's not due to how special Florida is. It's due to the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream, after any type of earth-shattering, freezing, flooding event, the area around the Gulf Stream, so the Gulf of Mexico, would be the first starting point, would be the first ecosystems to bounce back to 100% after a devastating worldwide cataclysm. So,
because of the way that it strategically is set up and the way that the ocean, the Gulf Stream, the water, the temperature, the location on the planet, all those perfect things that make Florida what it is.
That's what keeps this area, the Gulf of Mexico, in such an agreeable climate where it pretty much never goes beneath 50 degrees. It pretty much never goes above 100 degrees, believe it or not. Now, Texas can get pretty hot, but the coolest, the most agreeable parts are right along the Gulf Coast. When you're right along the water like that, the Gulf Stream, which is 10 degrees warmer on average than the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, basically keeps the climate perfect. It keeps the air fresh. It prevents freezing because that area is oozing 72-degree water. So even if it drops cold, that will remain warm if it drops beneath that. And Florida is that way too. Even if you froze Florida over intentionally, it would thaw out immediately because the spring water that oozes up from the ground is fixed at either 65 to 72 degrees. So when it drops beneath that in Florida, those springs start steaming and they're actually warm. So we're on a permanent heater here in the Gulf of Mexico.
That's pretty cool to think about like that.
Yeah. So a lot of this wisdom comes from Finland because Finland is the top of the planet, the tippy top. It's the finial, the pinnacle, as you said.
It's close as you can get to without being what we call the North Pole area.
Well, see, that's the thing is that Helsinki was the original North Pole.
So there has been a shift in the planet?
Yes. I wasn't there, so I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what happened.
Right.
But our sky is a bit skewed, and the seasons are more volatile than they should be. So, as I said, under perfect circumstances, the sun and the moon keep the planet perfectly temperate, perfectly moderately agreeable, between 75 and 85 degrees. That's perfect for me. Most people would probably think that's hot. But,
I try to keep my house about 72.
Because people point to tropical climates and say, oh, that's paradise, like Hawaii but these are too extreme. They're too tropical. You would not be able to live there without bug spray or some of these modern conveniences. And people did, don't get me wrong, and respect to them. But society, the way we think of it, this is why, I have this old article that my friend Analog dug up that shows back in the 1900s, they found a great wall in Mississippi, in Texas. And they said, this is so ancient and so large, this must be the cradle of civilization. So they were calling the Gulf of Mexico, back before the 1920s, the cradle of civilization, because that's what much of the evidence was showing them. The mound builders, the old megalithic structures.
Okay, so
Yeah.
real quick, because I know we kind of got off tangent, and I want to be respectful of your time, and I definitely want to get you back on. So I've got roughly 15 or so minutes.
Okay.
I know I got off track from the Gopher wood thing.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
can
know if
talk about
there's
that.
I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add with that. And then
Sure.
I
Yeah.
guess the other one thing though that I would like to maybe get some explanation on is you talk about the Mexico Mesopotamia like the way the linguistics are very similar. So
Mhm.
it makes me wonder too if when there was this flood and there was this family that built the boat, and when the boat landed, and did it land in Mesopotamia or did it land in Mexico?
It landed. So the funny thing about
And
the
and
ark.
then where does
Yeah.
the meso and mexo come in combination?
Well, what do you call Mexican Americans? They're Meso-American. People that live south of the United States are Meso-American.
Mhm.
Well, that's the same exact root as Mesopotamia.
Right.
So, and they'll tell you that that's kind of just like a longitudinal thing. Like meso means to be within those, but they won't even say that. They won't even admit that outright. They'll just say that's the possible explanation why for Meso-American and Mesopotamian. Well, for me, as a linguist, that's like, a nail in the coffin. But let's break it down. Mississippi means father of all the waters or mother of all the waters.
In what language?
The whatever native language
Okay.
Mississippi comes
All
from.
right. I was just curious.
Now, um, in Mesopotamia, that means between the waters or between the rivers. Mississippi meant the same thing. I got people trying to come in.
You good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Got a busy bookstore.
It is pretty busy, yeah.
That's good.
So next time I come on, I guess I'll do more of like a visual. I'll show some more stuff. But I've got all these old Mormon maps that show Mexico as the land of Shem. And Semitic, we know, means Shemitic. Shem and Sem are the same thing. So for that, the Meso and then the Sem overlay with the Seminoles coming to the aid of Montezuma when Cortez arrived, he called upon the Seminoles of Alabama to come aid him. And at that time, the Seminoles, known as the Muskogee, were undefeated in warfare and stood well over 6'4" and lived to about 100 years old out in the wild. So these are your long-lived, tall men of renown from the Old Testament. And if you go back even not that far, a little bit after that, in 1557, 1550s, around there, when the French were in Florida and South Carolina, they encountered Timucua, who were over 7 feet tall. Okay, gopher wood. I do want to talk about the gopher wood because that's such a big, important part.
And I'm taking notes so that when we do get back together and have a
Okay.
conversation, that we'll try to make this more cohesive. This is usually what my first conversation with people can be all over the place. And I apologize even to you for, kind of going back and forth and time traveling in this conversation.
Don't worry.
Thank you.
I think podcasts are great for
free flow of ideas.
Quickly covering a lot of topics that people can, divert off from there.
Yeah.
But the gopher wood is very important because back in the original Hebrew, there's only one instance of the word gopher ever being used, and that's when God instructs Noah to build the ark from gopher wood. Now, gopher has not used in any other instance in Hebrew. No other application, and it's never used in the Bible again. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
When E.E. Calloway moved to Northwest Florida from Central Florida, because he was instructed by a Florida mystic by the name of Dr. Brown Landone. He was initiated into the Order of Melchizedek, and he was told to go locate the original source of, humanity, so to speak. And I don't necessarily agree with that. So, if people ask me, I always point to the North Pole. Humanity, modern civilized humanity, came out of the North Pole, in my opinion. But basically, in the Apalachicola River area that I was speaking about earlier, you have, of the 28 trees identified in the Bible, E. Calloway, with the help of some experts, identified 27 of them in the Apalachicola River area of northwest Florida. In this area, we find the one and only gopher wood as well. Gopher wood is endemic to a small strip of the Apalachicola River area between Florida and a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of Georgia and a tiny bit of Alabama. And this tree is planted pretty much only one place else, in the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, unironically.
Evil grounds.
And basically, the gopher wood goes by the name Torreya, the Torreya pine, named for the guy that discovered it in like 1900, around there. But the common name at the time was gopher wood, and also stinking cedar, because it smells. It has a smell to it. So gopher wood was like a common name at the time. And when E. Calloway encountered this tree and studied its properties with the help of some experts, he came to the realization that this is the Gopher wood in the Bible. So in this old Kabbalistic Hebrew, gopher wood can be Gopher wood with a C. G and C are the same phonetic word. So just like Greek and Creek are the same.
Okay.
Gopher and Gopher wood are K and G are the same. So this gopher wood, which was translated into English 500 years ago as gopher wood with a G, by John Dee, right, the Queen's magician, they knew what they were talking about, and they were pointing to this tree in Florida. And it wasn't until kind of 400 years later that we would get around to Florida and start poking around and studying. But that's what he did, and he always points to the fact that the theologians of the time had no idea that the Western continent existed. So how could they incorporate the Americas into the story when that story landed in Mount Ararat, and all memory of the homeland it departed from was lost? So that Noah's Ark departed from northwest Florida. Now, Arkadelphia was a hub of arks and travel. So arks were going up and down the Mississippi River in ancient times. The Mississippi, the River Isis ark, was a homeland of arks, land of the arks going up and down that river. Arkansas having some of the most Mississippian coastline. So it was Arkadelphia, a city of arks, right? And
no, it's interesting to think about. I never thought about the etymology of those words and how they might correlate to that.
Mm-hmm. You have Baghdad up there
so
too.
Is there another place in the world where there's a large gathering of gopher or gopher wood?
No,
that you know
it is
of? Have
endemic.
You researched this?
It is endemic only to the northwest coast of Florida.
Okay.
Only in the Apalachicola River. It is only there. It has been planted in some other areas like the Biltmore Estates in Asheville.
Which would make sense that it could survive in North Carolina, being
right.
It's not that far off from climate.
Yes, and the Apalachicola River area is very, very, very unique. So you find trees that should not be growing in Florida, but they will grow in this one, almost like a garden, very, very unique river valley. And this river valley, being the Apalachicola, terminates into a four-headed river system. So the way that everyone goes wrong with the four rivers of Eden, and hey, it may be allegorical. I'm right. I agree with you. Yeah, fire, water, air, earth, the cardinal directions. It could be any of them. But 4 literal rivers of Eden, because the allegorical interpretation never negates the physical. It only adds a dimension to it.
Okay, that makes sense.
With the 4 rivers of Eden, everyone will say, oh, one was the Nile, one was the Euphrates, one's in Ethiopia. But they all neglect the fact that these rivers came to a single head. 4 rivers and a single head. There is only one equal 4-headed river system in the world, and that is Lake Seminole on the Florida-Georgia border. You have a 4-headed river system. The Pison, the Gihon, the Hiddekel, and the Euphrates are all to be found on this river. And I'm not saying that's the only interpretation of the 4-river story, of course, but they are to be found in this area, precisely next to where the wood is found. So to have the wood, and he found petrified logs of gopher wood that looked like they had been chainsawed. So this is really what got him thinking about ancient times, was petrified wood with a chainsawed cut should not be able to exist.
Shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So now, do you think that this ark would have landed on Mount Ararat area?
Did. Some of them did. Arks did. Some arks.
So you think there was more than one ark?
Yes, but there was one that was Noah's, and
did Noah's have Shem on it?
Listen, see that.
I'm just curious because we think of Shem as being one of Noah's 3 sons.
Yes, so Noah's 3 sons were with him and did land there, and I'm not affirming that story, but I'm saying officially that did happen in Turkey or Armenia as well. And Armenia is Armenia, where the ark came to rest. So
Armenia, fuck man.
Ararat, right? So the mountains of Ararat is where you had
Ararat.
Now we're told that Noah's Ark spent what do they say?
How much time it was floating?
About 150 days. The journey was about. So it rained for 40 days, but the whole journey, time at sea, time in the boat was about 140, 150 days.
Yeah, and they want you to think that where it landed was in the vicinity of where it was constructed, and a boat just doesn't float still.
It just went up
when you have moving waters.
Exactly. So whereas that timeline makes perfect sense for a ship going from the Gulf of Mexico, and the dead giveaway is the fact that in the Muslim account, the ark is said to have circled the Kaaba 3 times. So how does a boat going up in these tumultuous oceans go to where the Kaaba used to be, right underwater ocean, under the sea, and circle it 3 times? It can't. It makes no sense.
Where is the Kaaba located?
In Medina, Saudi Arabia. So it would have had to go south to Medina, circle the Kaaba, then go back up past Iraq, where it took off from, north to Ararat, and land in the mountains. And it's still all a very short journey. Yeah. Very unlikely. Whereas for it to have left the Gulf of Mexico and to have circled Cuba 3 times, now that makes a hell of a lot more sense. And Cuba was originally spelled Kuuba, like the Kaaba. I have maps that show that.
That's wild.
So Cuba and Kaaba. What's the Kaaba? It's a cube, is it not?
It sounds very cube-like.
The Kaaba is a cube. So the Kaaba is the thing that the Muslims circle in Medina, in Saudi Arabia. It's the black cube.
That's where that black cube is.
Worship.
That's in Saudi Arabia.
So Kaaba and cube, when you mix those words together, you get Cuba. Now, if a boat was leaving the Gulf of Mexico and a part of Cuba was sticking out of the ground, now that boat could circle that mountaintop 3 times. And that would make sense to me because of the currents in the Straits of Florida and the Straits of Yucatan. So that makes a lot more sense to me. And then after circling Cuba 3 times, near the lodestone in the Chicxulub crater, in the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula, this is, and Mecca is Mexico, by the way. Mecca, Mexico, Cuba, Kaaba, right? So circling the Cuba three times, it then crossed the Atlantic and landed in the mountains of Ararat, where there are a number of ancient stone anchors deposited on the hillsides and mountain slopes at the base of the mountains of Ararat. You have ancient stone anchors.
Yeah, man, this is some wild research, man, that you've put together. That's one of the reasons I really like your channel. So I guess what I would say, you know, before we get ready to wrap things up is, again, I will have links down below for Old World Florida, the YouTube channel, and also if you want to support the good doctor, you can also check out his Patreon. These will both be linked down below, as well as, let me make sure I can just pull it up and saved so I can include this link for Ross Broadstrack's Britain's Hidden History as well. I want to make sure I include that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem, man. I like to pay homage to people because, I mean, if anything, when we're researching, which means that someone else searched for us to research, and we're standing on the shoulder of giants. Like, you know, obviously you've gotten a lot of your work from other individuals.
Oh, yeah.
So we definitely had to pay homage to those. So yeah, I definitely am, you know, going to check out that one channel and see what he's at. Because dude, I mean, I really like the idea of what the human history is, what happened, and why it was obscured from us. And I would think it would have to do more than just resources. You know, there has to be some, you know, I can see kind of limiting human potential of making you think that there's nothing special about who you are. So that makes a lot of sense. But before we wrap up, man, do you have any final thoughts, anything else that you would like to add? And no, the other thing I was going to tell you, man, is you should get a website created where people can find you in like some central location. I'm sure you've had that suggestion come up to you.
Yeah, my assistant's working on a website right now. But
cool. It'd be good to have a place, because I'm sure you have some research that YouTube is not going to be real happy with you ever having. So it'd be good to have some uncensored.
Oh yeah.
Uncensored stuff that because YouTube, I mean, I've seen a lot of channels covering this alternative history stuff that get shadow banned and taken down. So there's obviously something to this.
Now, luckily I know there's key things that you really got to stay away from, and luckily my research doesn't cross over with those too much, but I do self-censor so that I don't end up getting, you know, censored by Big Daddy. YouTube.
Yeah, I think you have to on YouTube, and it sucks to even admit that we self-censor, but yeah, I put up uncensored content on Rumble and Odyssey, you know, to encourage people to follow me on other platforms as well.
But I'd love to talk some astrology next time, maybe go through the whole calendar. That's like a great conversational thing that takes up enriches a good amount of time. Basically, people are so, I think it's criminal when people don't know where the days of the week come from. Why there's 12 months? Why September is the 9th month and not the 7th, despite it literally translating to 7th month. Astrology makes light of all that.
Well, I mean, I've even heard where March used to be considered the beginning of the year.
It is. It is. It's the rightful beginning of the year. But we'll get into that.
Yeah. I guess one question, though, without you having to give me a long answer, is you mentioned at the very beginning of this Tartaria. Is that an area of research that's BS, or is there something to it? Is there correlation?
Oh, there's definitely something to it.
Okay, we can dive more into it. I just wasn't sure if you were finding it to be irrelevant.
There's just some of the biggest Tartaria channels are like complete, you know, just
BS,
mouth breather BS sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
And I think it's tragic, but whatever.
Okay. Any final thoughts? Anything else you want to add?
No, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, no problem, man. Again, I'm going to have links down below for your YouTube channel and your Patreon. I definitely encourage people to check it out. And we're definitely going to do this sooner than later so I can keep all of this fresh. So I'll reach back out to you about scheduling. Maybe we can even potentially do next Monday or a week or 2 weeks from today, depending on your schedule. That'd be great. So if you could bear with me 1 second, just going to do the wrap up. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I do appreciate you taking the time to tune in. Make sure you're checking out Dr. Narco Longo's Old World Florida YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed here at Rice Against the Grain, as well as my other channel, Rice TVX. And if you haven't already, make sure you smash that like button, because it does help people to find these videos in the YouTube algorithm flow, or at least that's what they tell me. And before we wrap things up, I want to encourage you to be a blessing to others. Treat people how you want to be treated. Be the glitch you want to see in the matrix. Be the change you want to see in the world. And until next time, practice change.